In today's podcast, you'll learn all about auxiliary verbs. What are they? Why do we use them? How do we use them? And we'll also answer Reyna's question about using auxiliary verbs for emphasis. So do please take a seat, relax, and enjoy this grammar episode of
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. After a lovely piece of cake, homemade cake, chocolate, of course, and coffee, I suddenly have an energy boost.
Me too, a sugar rush. Now, we usually have a guest biscuit. It might be a shortbread biscuit. It might be a chocolate digestive. It might be another kind of guest biscuit that comes into the house for our coffee break. But today it was a lovely piece of homemade cake. It was very nice.
We've even occasionally had very special guest biscuits. We once had a Bourbon, a royal biscuit.
A Bourbon cream.
Yeah, Bourbon cream. Could it have been related to the King of Spain? I don't know. Possibly.
What's first this week, Reza?
First of all, we got a voice message from Maite from Seville or Sevilla.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. My name is Maite, and I'm from Seville. I'm talking to you because I need some advice. I am going to go to London by myself because I want to practice my English, and I need some ideas about how to practice my speaking and listening while I were there. I thought about going shopping or attending some free tours in order to improve my listening and my speaking. But I would like to know if you have new options or can you help me? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maite, for your message. It's very exciting that you're going to London and you're very keen and enthusiastic to practice your English. Before we give you one or two pieces of advice, just one thing on your message. You said, can you give some advice on practicing speaking and listening while I were there? We can improve that. Better to say, when I'm there or while I'm there. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, Craig, that's present simple. I am there, but I'm speaking about the future. That's because when we use this construction with when or while, it's used to be the subjunctive, didn't it, Rezo? It kind of changes the tense. We need the present simple tense after that construction with when. And it's a bit strange, but we're really talking about the future.
Maite, I can give you some general advice about when you visit an English-speaking country, wherever it is, but I'm going to pass you over to Craig about specific advice for London, because he is from the London area, so he knows it better than me. But generally speaking, just, get involved in conversation as much as you can. Even if you don't need to speak to people, speak to them. So go into shops, buy things, say, good morning, how are you? It's a lovely day, isn't it? Get a little bit of chat out of people. Use every opportunity to speak, even though you know that the thing you've bought in the chemist, a packet of paracetamol, costs you, I don't know, €4.20. You say, how much is that? So that they say €4.20. And you say, oh, here's £5, yeah, and get the change, etc. Even though it's not necessary, just talk as much as you can. Get into conversations. That's my basic advice. But Craig probably has some specific tips about London.
Well, with London, first of all, mate, don't expect the Londoners to run to you and put their arms around you and be very willing and happy to speak English, because London, as the capital, as a very big city, think of other cities like New York, like Paris. they don't tend to be very friendly places. They have a lot of tourists, people working there, and in the service industries, in hotels, in bars and restaurants. Yeah, they might be polite, but they're not usually very, very friendly. You're much likely to meet friendlier people if you go outside the big cities and you go into villages and towns. Having said that, I second what Reza has said. That's very good advice. But I'd also add it's important to ask follow-up questions when you're in those conversations. What's a follow-up question? Well, if you've paid for the thing you're buying in the chemist and you've got your change, ask another question. So, excuse me, do you know where there's a shoe shop near here? Or can you tell me the way to the nearest supermarket? Or anybody in any situation, in a pub, in a cafe, in a restaurant, just get chatting. Ask extra questions. Find out some information. Have some small talk about the weather, about the traffic, about, I don't know, anything you can think of. Comment on what somebody's wearing, for example. Like, I really like your t-shirt. Where did you buy your earrings? They're really, really nice. Just try and be as open and as outgoing and as lively as possible. And then hopefully, I can't promise, then you'll get the same kind of reaction back. And another thing I'd say, there's a website that I like very much called meetup.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's meetup.com. And it's very good for language exchange. So you might be able to go to a place in London where people are learning different languages and meet in a cafe or in a bar and speak with other language learners, but also for local interest groups. So maybe you're interested in photography, maybe you're interested in movies or reading. You can find a place there where you can go on meetup.com and it's free, and you go along, you have a drink, have a coffee and speak to people in English. You can look for these interest groups on meetup.com and also language exchange groups that might be happening in London. I'm sure there are many.
One more thing I would say, Maite, don't be surprised or worried if you say something to somebody and they don't understand you. It may not be because of your English. It may be because they don't speak English as a first language. Craig, how many people would you say on an average street in London are not native English speakers?
Yeah, there are lots of foreign students there studying English. There are lots of people working there in service industries. So that definitely could happen.
The last time I was in London, I had to ask for directions. And I was in a very traditional neighborhood in East Ham, in the east of London. And I had to find an address. And I had to ask about 7 people before I got a native English speaker who could answer me. I asked a Pole, I think somebody was probably Portuguese, a French person, an Arab, until the 7th or 8th person could speak English and could tell me. It's happened to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, have a lovely trip, Maite. And please let us know when you come back from your trip to London, what it was like and what your experiences were. Next, we have a voice message from Reyna from Mexico.
Hello, good morning, Reza and Craig. This is Reyna from Mexico. This is not my first message. I have sent several, perhaps 3 or 4. And in this time, I would like to propose a topic. I'm not sure if you have talked about it in other or in a previous one, about the confirmation in a statement. I don't know how to call it exactly. I mean, when a person says, for example, yes, I do believe in your word. Or, for example, I did visit the museum last week. That kind of statements where you add do or did to reinforce the positive. I think like a yes or like adding a yes confirmation, but I don't know about how to use the structure. A coworker uses it a lot, but I don't know exactly what is the rule. Please, could you help me and to understand this? Thank you guys and have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you very much for your message, Reyna, and your pronunciation was very clear, very good.
Yes.
Really good. And I don't think you made any mistakes. Your English was very accurate. Let me see if I understand. Basically, you're interested in the use of auxiliaries to confirm things, for confirmation, or we might say for emphasis. That's what you want to know about. Yes, we can answer your question, but as well as that, we're going to talk about auxiliaries in general. So one of the things you can do with auxiliaries is to confirm things, to emphasize that it's a yes or no, but there are other things as well, of course.
Yes, thank you very much for the message, Reyna. And although this may be revision for some of you listeners who have a more advanced level, it's always good to review the basics and make sure you're using your grammar correctly. Before we start explaining how to use auxiliary verbs, Reza, if people have problems with grammar, I know you're very busy at the moment, you don't have currently a lot of free time, but generally speaking, you can help people improve their grammar and their English, can't you?
Yes. If you're interested in a one-to-one class, that can be particularly helpful if you have grammar problems, although it can also be helpful for all the other aspects of your English, your pronunciation, your listening, your reading, your writing, speaking, etc. But it's very, very useful for specific grammar points to be able to work individually with the teacher. Send me an email. I may take a few weeks to reply to you because I'm exceptionally busy at the minute, but I definitely will eventually reply. Send me an email to belfastreza@gmail.com and let's see what we can do.
And if you've studied grammar for many, many years and you really don't want to study any more grammar, you want to use it and you want to speak and you want to work on your fluency, then I might have a solution for you. I have conversation courses at different levels, and that means a small group of lovely people get together on Zoom, and we have discussions, debates, role plays, and the main focus of these classes is to improve your speaking and your fluency and make you a more effective English speaker. If that's interesting to you, send me an email, and my address is Craig, CRAIG, @inglespodcast.com. Now let's get back to Reyna's message and auxiliary verbs in general. Now, verbs in English, they don't have many different forms. If you look at other languages, French, Spanish, they tend to have more. The maximum number, except for the verb to be, is 5. So if we take the verb to see, for example, to see will be the infinitive. You've got see, I see. You've got sees, the third person. He sees, she sees, it sees. You've got seeing, the continuous. You've got saw, the past, or the second form. And you've got seen, the past participle. So those are the 5 forms of the verb.
Some verbs, of course, have even fewer. See is an irregular verb, so that the past simple is saw, as Craig said, and the past simple is seen. But some verbs only have 4 forms because the past simple and the past participle are the same. Take a verb like to listen. So I listen, third person singular, he, she, it listens. I am listening. And then he listened, past simple, and he has listened, present perfect, using the past participle. It actually only has 4 forms if it's a regular verb because it's ed for both the past simple and the past participle. So guys, really, there's not a lot to learn about English verbs compared to other languages. Hey, Spanish, French, Italian, they're much, much, much more complicated than English when it comes to verbs.
That's true. That's very true. However, to express different meanings, we use auxiliary verbs. And these auxiliary verbs, they help the main verbs. And there are 2 groups of auxiliary verbs. There's do, be, and have, those three. And there's also modal auxiliary verbs. For example, will, should, must, may, and could.
We use these modal verbs that Craig mentioned to add meaning to main verbs. For example, it could be the meaning of certainty or probability. Like I might say to you, I might go to France on holiday. So I've added this modal auxiliary, the modal might, so it adds meaning to the verb go. I'm not saying that I'm definitely going. I'm saying that I might go. It's a possibility. So this is what a modal verb does. Another one could be that I say, Reza must be teaching. He's not answering his phone. So I say must there because I'm deducing, it's a deduction, because Reza always answers his phone, but he's not answering right now.
Actually, he doesn't answer his phone. He usually doesn't answer his phone.
So the word must there, like the word might, is a modal. It adds meaning. Can you think of any other modals in example sentences, Craig?
Well, you've given examples of certainty, probability. We can also use modal verbs for giving advice or expressing obligation. For example, your friend's not feeling too well and you say you should go to the doctor, giving advice. Or another example, I must buy a new pair of slippers. That's obligation. I feel a very strong obligation to buy new slippers for the house. Actually, that's true. My slippers, the house shoes, the slippers I wear in the house are falling apart. They are completely destroyed. So I must go shopping next week and buy a new pair of slippers. Another example of a modal verb for obligation. Now, we have spoken about modal verbs many times on previous podcasts, so we're going to stop there today about modal verbs. If you are interested in learning more about how to use these modal verbs, go to the website inglespodcast.com. You'll see a search box and just put modal verbs, MODAL, verbs, in the search, and you'll see a wide range of podcasts explaining to you the use of modal verbs.
So today, to answer Reyna's question, we're just going to focus on auxiliary verbs, not the modal auxiliaries, the normal, let's say, auxiliaries. So auxiliary verbs which don't add extra meaning like obligation, certainty, probability. No, they're simply to form a question or a negative or for a few other reasons. So, to be or not to be, that is the question. Let's start with be. A word which you need to know a lot about. Craig, what can you tell the listeners about the word be?
Well, we use be to other verbs. We add them to other verbs to make the passive and the progressive or the continuous forms. For example, in the question, is it raining? So there is the form of the verb to be for a question. Is it raining? Or they were eating their dinner. Continuous. Or he was imprisoned for stealing the money. He was. That's the past tense of be. Or it was raining during the concert. Past continuous, past progressive. Or it's beautiful to love and to be loved. So there you have it is, and also to be loved, passive.
So that's the verb to be as an auxiliary. Don't confuse it with the verb to be on its own. That's a different matter. If I say to you, I am a podcaster, I'm using the verb to be, I am. But it isn't an auxiliary. The verb to be there is the main verb. There's no other verb. It's not the same as saying, I am listening. So the verb is listen, and I have am as an auxiliary. If I say to you, I am a podcaster, it's not auxiliary be, it's the main verb be. So we're talking in this podcast about auxiliary verb be.
Moving on to do. We use do to make questions, to make negatives, and emphatic forms when we want to stress things. Here's an example of a question. Do you like this podcast? The verb is like, and we're using do as an auxiliary to make a question. It doesn't matter that you have do in third person. Negative. It doesn't matter. Do please sit down. I can say sit down, but if I want to be more emphatic and more polite, I can say do please sit down. Did, the past of do. Did you visit Scotland last year? A question in the past. They didn't attend class yesterday. Negative in the past with did. And the verb in that sentence is attend. Now, if you want to follow everything we're saying, go to the show notes, inglespodcast.com/517. You can read these examples as we are saying them. That might be easier if you're feeling a bit confused. Why didn't you send me a photo on your mobile? Why didn't you? Another example of did in the negative in the past to make a question. What about have, Reza?
Have, like be, or like do, it can be the main verb. For example, Craig has a very nice flat. He has.
Thank you.
It's the verb to have. I didn't say any other verb. I just said Craig has a very nice flat. Or Craig does many things at the weekend. He does. I'm using the word there, does, the third person of do, but again as the main verb, because there's no other verb. It's only when you have be or do or have with another verb, then you know it's auxiliary. Yeah, so the word have can also be an auxiliary, and it's used as an auxiliary to make perfect forms. For example, what have you done today?
What have you? What have you? Difficult to catch that auxiliary verb in that pronunciation, isn't it? What have you?
And I didn't do that on purpose to make it hard for you listeners. It just came out that way because that's the way a native speaker speaks. You might want me to say, what have you done today? But I'm more likely to say, what have you done today? I can write the word have, H-A-V-E, or I can write the contracted form, which is the way I said it. For example, we've tried that new Mexican restaurant. Instead of saying we have, I've said we've. And it can be very hard if you're not a native speaker to hear that I added the v sound. It's much easier to hear have, but if I use the contracted form, we've, it's just a little v sound. That's all you've got. So you have to pay attention because you might think I'm saying the present simple. We try, but I said we've tried. So you got to look out for the v after we and the d sound at the end of tried. Another example could be with have as a negative auxiliary. I haven't drunk alcohol for many years. That's not strictly speaking true. It's just an example.
True for me.
I drank a little bit too much alcohol last night, in fact. So I can't say this is true.
That's what I was going to ask you with the auxiliary verb did. What did you do last night?
I drank too much alcohol. That's what I did. So this wasn't the greatest example, but I'd already written this example before I decided to drink last night. We've already seen the contraction of have is apostrophe VE. We've tried that new Mexican restaurant was my example. And of course, has also can be contracted to apostrophe S. So I could say he has just arrived. But a native speaker is much more likely to say most of the time, he's just arrived. He's. And then you have to ask yourself, oh, hold on. Apostrophe S, is that not the verb to be? Yes, it is. And here's where we start to get a bit complicated because an example that Craig read earlier of the verb to be was, it's beautiful to love. And to be loved, it's beautiful. He was using apostrophe S as contraction of the verb to be. It's. But apostrophe S can also be the contraction of has. This is where it gets tricky. So he's just arrived. If I have the word arrived, that's a past participle with ed. So that tells me then that the apostrophe S must be has, because you cannot put auxiliary be with a past participle. So if I hear the sound s and then a past participle, he's arrived, the s sound, apostrophe S, it must be has. It's logical. Think about it. Can you think of any other examples, Craig?
Well, we use the auxiliary verb have when we make the past perfect. For example, I realized that I had forgotten my wallet. Two verbs in that sentence. The first verb, realized, is past simple, but something happened before I realized. I forgot my wallet. So to show that the forgetting of the wallet came before I realized, or my realization, I used the past perfect. I realized that I had forgotten my wallet. So the past of have, had, we use that with the past perfect together with the past participle. Now, when you say that in normal spoken English, as Reza mentioned, you use those contractions. I'd forgotten my wallet. So I realized I'd forgotten my wallet, but that had, that auxiliary verb had, is in there somewhere. An example of the past perfect with had as well. She'd already visited France before the war. She had already visited. Again, that contraction. She'd already visited France before the war. And something that Reza said to me when he arrived today to start podcasting, I wish I hadn't drunk so much last night. I wish I hadn't. So there is the past regret with I wish. And after I wish and if only, we use the past perfect construction. So I wish I hadn't drunk so much last night.
So we've spoken about the basic constructions with the auxiliary verbs be, do, and have for negatives and for questions, or even a negative question like, why didn't you send me a photo on your mobile? Yeah, didn't used as a negative, but a question as well. We also use auxiliary verbs in short answers. For example, if someone asks the question, do you like apples? So they use do in the question. The person who answered will probably also repeat the auxiliary do in their answer. They'll say, do you like apples? Yes, I do. In English, you can just say yes if you want, but it can sound a little bit abrupt. It can sound a little bit rude sometimes. So we prefer to repeat the auxiliary verb.
And I think that refers to Reyna's question about using the auxiliary verb to answer or confirm something, right? Or also sometimes for emphasis, to make it more emphatic. Do you like apples? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. So you repeat the auxiliary verb in the confirmation. It could also be negative, of course. No, I don't. But you're still repeating the same auxiliary verb that you heard in the question.
I tell you what, let's demonstrate a few more examples of short answers to questions. I'll ask a question and Craig's going to answer, and he's going to repeat or use the appropriate auxiliary. Craig, did your daughter come home very late last night?
Yes, I'm afraid she did.
So he wasn't happy about his daughter coming home so late, I guess. Tell me, you haven't eaten the last biscuit, Craig.
Yes, I have. Sorry.
What a surprise. And the next one, does your back still hurt?
No, it doesn't now. So when you get asked a question and you want to answer with an auxiliary verb, listen for the auxiliary verb in the question and then repeat it in your answer, in the short answer, either in a positive form or a negative form. But it's not only in short answers that we can sometimes use auxiliary verbs for emphasis. We can also use auxiliary verbs before the main verb to emphasize it. Now you can say, I believe, or I think, I believe you're right, I think you're right. But if we want to emphasize that, we can use the auxiliary verb do. And we stress it. I do believe that you're right. I do think that we should do this. And you often hear this construction, especially with politicians, because they're emphasizing the point and they're stressing how much they believe in what the country should do. And they use these auxiliary verbs for emphasis. Can you think of any more examples?
For example, Imagine I was trying to convince my friend that the girl that he's interested in likes him, but he's very modest. He doesn't think so. And I say to him, no, she does like you, I'm sure. Now, I could have just said, she likes you. But by using the auxiliary in a positive sentence before like, I'm stressing it because I'm trying to convince him. I'm trying to emphasize that she really does, that he should believe me. She does like you, I'm sure. Another example could be if you think someone shouldn't do something and they're determined to do it, instead of just saying, I think you're making a mistake, don't do what you're going to do. If they're determined to do it and you really want to stress that you do not agree, you could say, I do think you're making a mistake. It's there almost as a warning. I've told you, I'm emphasizing my opinion here. I do think you're making a mistake. You're going to regret this.
And one pronunciation point here with Reza's last example, you're really stressing, you're really hearing that auxiliary verb do on purpose, because very often when we use auxiliary verbs, for example, in a question, it completely changes its pronunciation. For example, listen to this question with the same words. Do you think I'm making a mistake? It's not do you, it's do you. Do you? Do you think? Do you think? Do you think I'm making a mistake? You might even hear j, only j. Do you think? Do you think I'm making a mistake? That's very common. However, as we've just said, you emphasize the auxiliary verb to emphasize the verb that follows it.
For example, imagine I see a child that I haven't seen in a while. Let's say this boy is 10 years old. The last time I saw him, he was 7. And I say to him, you have grown. So I'm emphasizing have. You have grown. Wow. You were, 20, 30 centimeters shorter the last time I saw you. You really have grown. So I stress the word have to emphasize the fact that he's grown a lot.
And compare these two sentences. I'm telling the truth. I am telling the truth. Stressing that auxiliary verb am and not contracting it. Just I am, I'm, but making it clear I am and making it a very strong sound emphasizes the fact that you're telling the truth. I am telling the truth, I promise.
And using the full form of the negative, so instead of don't, do not, am not, have not, instead of the contraction, for a negative, that can add emphasis as well. So instead of saying, I don't agree with that statement, if I want to emphasize my strong disagreement, I would probably say, I do not agree with that statement. So I want the words do and not to be very clearly heard because I want to emphasize my strong disagreement.
And some of our younger listeners might not remember this, but quite a few years ago, the ex-president of the United States, Bill Clinton, was in a lot of trouble. We can say he was in hot water because he was accused of having sex with a woman who worked in his office called Monica Lewinsky. It was called the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And when he was accused, he used that emphatic auxiliary verb. Reza, you've got a much better American accent than I have. Can you do this in Bill Clinton's voice?
Well, I don't know. I'll give it a go. So I'm being accused, and I reply, I have not had sex with that woman.
I have not.
I have not. And I think he said, I have not, about 3 times after that.
Yeah.
So even first in his sentence, I have not had sex with that woman. And then he repeated it. He said, I have not. I have not. Instead of saying I haven't, he didn't use the contraction because he wanted to stress that it was not true, apparently, according to him.
Allegedly. We can also use auxiliary verbs when we want to contradict someone or when we want to agree with them. So contradiction or agreement. For example, Reza, you didn't send me the notes for today's podcast.
Yes, I did.
So that's the full auxiliary verb Reza's using to contradict my statement. Let's have another example. I've never seen anything like this before.
I have. I'm using the auxiliary there to show that my experience is different to Craig's. He's never seen anything like this before. I have seen something like this before. So I simply repeat the auxiliary. Yep. Actually, I would say there's two ways of pronouncing this. You could say, I have, and stress have, but you can also stress I. I would say there's two different types of pronunciation here. So if Craig says, I've never seen anything like this before, I can stress the word I to show that one thing is his experience and the other is my experience. So I could say, I have. Or I could look at it a different way and I could stress the fact that he hasn't, I have. And in that case, I stress the word have. So I have. So I think actually both different types of putting the stress on one word or the other, they both work, don't they?
They do, and I think the stressing the pronoun, the I, is often used when we want to sound like we're better than the other person. I've never been to Morocco. Oh, I have. I've never seen the Eiffel Tower. Oh, really? I have. So we sometimes use that, especially when we're children, to show that, yeah, well, I've done it, but you haven't.
That's a good point. Yeah, I guess the standard way, if you don't want to add that special meaning, is to emphasize the auxiliary, just to stress the fact that one person hasn't done the action and the other has. So I have, stressing I, it's like, ooh, you haven't, I have. So yes, I would. That's a good point, Craig. They have slightly different implications depending which word you stress, right?
Exactly.
By the way, I could have agreed with Craig when he said, I've never seen anything like this before. That was a negative sentence, but I could agree with his negative. I could say, neither have I.
Do you say neither or neither? Neither.
I usually say neither.
I say neither. Doesn't matter. Reza, I hope it's sunny tomorrow.
So do I. So I'm using the auxiliary verb do there to say I agree, I have the same opinion or wish. So I don't repeat the main verb, hope. I need to know what verb form Craig used. I hope is a present simple. So then I have to think of grammar a little bit and realize that do is the auxiliary for the present simple. So I say, so do I.
Of course, we can also use the negative. For example, I hope it's sunny tomorrow.
Really? I don't. I don't want it to be sunny tomorrow. I would prefer a rainy day.
What a strange Irishman. Another auxiliary verb is does. We've mentioned does and doesn't. So she doesn't eat meat. I think she's a vegetarian.
She does eat meat, but not very often.
So can you hear that auxiliary verb being stressed there? She does eat meat. So when we're contradicting someone, saying the opposite, we stress that auxiliary verb.
Craig, you don't like chocolate biscuits, do you?
Yes, I do. And you very well know that, Reza.
Anyone who questions Craig's like of chocolate biscuits clearly does not know him.
So, Reyna, we hope that explanation of auxiliary verbs for confirmation, for contradiction, I hope that's what you were expecting that we explained. If there are any problems or doubts, if you want to ask us anything, or anybody who's still having problems with this, please let us know. But before we go, there's another use of auxiliary verbs that we want to leave you with, and that is in tag questions. Now, we've spoken about tag questions before. Again, if you want more information, go and search on the website, but we'll give you a couple of examples. Reza, you live here, don't you?
Yes, I do.
So I thought Reza lived in Valencia. I just wanted to check the information. So I used a tag question. And because we've given examples of that present simple verb, you need a auxiliary verb do or does. You live here. you do live here, and then with a tag question, you need to change the auxiliary verb to a negative. So if the first part is positive, the tag will be negative, and vice versa. You live here, don't you? Another example with has, Reza hasn't arrived yet, has he? So the same idea. You've got has, but in the negative, so the tag must be in the positive, and you just repeat the auxiliary verb. He hasn't arrived yet, has he?
What? He's late? What a surprise.
He's never late. Can you think of a couple more examples of tag questions, Reza?
Here's one in the past simple. So I'm going to add a little bit of confusion here, not to make your life difficult, listeners, just because it happens, so you better get used to the idea. We said earlier, do you remember, that all of these auxiliaries, be and have and do, they also are main verbs. So apart from being used as auxiliaries, they can be the main verb. For example, Ronnie did a good job, didn't he? I'm using the word did there in the first part, Ronnie did a good job, not as an auxiliary, but as the main verb.
To do a good job.
Just like to eat, to run, to sleep, to go, to do. So very often, I'm not trying to make your life difficult. It really happens. Very often you will get the word do or did or does as both a main verb and an auxiliary in the same sentence. So in Spanish, it would be Ronnie hizo un trabajo bueno, ¿verdad? But in English, hacer is the word do. So Ronnie did a good job, didn't he? Another one. Craig isn't still eating biscuits, is he?
Yes, he is. And now it's your turn to practice your English. What grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation area would you like us to speak about next? But before you send us your suggestions, please do a quick search on our website, inglespodcast.com, just to check that we haven't already spoken about it. And again, if you want more information on modal verbs, on tag questions, or other grammar points, search on the website. There's a very, very strong possibility that we have already created podcasts about them. But please do send us a voice message. Reza, how can people do that?
You can record your voice on SpeakPipe. There's a link in the show notes. It's speakpipe.com/Inglespodcast. Remember, there's a maximum of 90 seconds. So after a minute and a half, it cuts out. If you need to send us a longer message, I guess you could email, you could write. Craig, where can people get hold of you?
People can reach me at Craig, that's CRAIG, at inglespodcast.com. And if you want to contact Reza by email, write to Belfast Reza, that's Belfast, the city in Northern Ireland, and REZA at gmail.com.
If you're a Spanish speaker and you want to study for free, why not visit the Mansión Inglés website? And also, for paid ebooks and audios and other self-study material, check out the online store. Go to store, that's STORE, store.mansioningles.net.
And before we say goodbye today, we'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our lovely Patreon supporters. And these are people who give us a little bit of money every month to keep the podcast going and also to receive instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/Inglespodcast. There's a link to that in the show notes. And for as little as $1.50 per month, you'll be able to read the full transcription. Reza, who are our most recent contributors?
A big thank you to them. Those people are Charlie, Orlando Olivares, Francisco Armas, Milagros Cebeso, and Ignacio Gil Ruiz. And also a thank you to all our Patreon supporters.
We do hope that you have found value in this week's podcast on auxiliary verbs. If you have, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And next week, thanks to an idea by friend of the show, Wessel from Brazil, we're going to talk about virtues and vices. So please join us for that. Until then, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.